This is Chris Crowe.
And that's Kevin Lennon. Actually, my pretentious name is C. Tennyson Crowe. I was the narrator on Scrimshaw. Oh, about me. I was a graduate of the Tisch School of the Arts at New York University in the dramatic writing program. Nowadays, I'm more of a labor activist, but I still dabble a little bit in writing, and occasionally, apparently, in narrating. I tried to bring a certain emotional reality to it as best I could. I grew up originally in southeastern Connecticut, which is, if anyone is familiar, not too far from the Mystic Seaport. In the 19th century, it actually was a big whaling port. So, that sort of filtered through my cultural upbringing. Also, of course, Moby Dick is one of my favorite novels. It's probably the pinnacle of American literature, and you can prompt me very easily to start quoting from it. The ship! Great God, where is the ship? Sorry. I actually grew up in the town of Norwich, Connecticut, which is a little bit, about maybe 20 minutes north of Mystic, at the head of the Thames, not the Thames, the Thames River. I grew up part of my childhood in the house that my great-grandfather bought. He came over from Italy in about 1914. He was escaping the draft in World War I. My great-grandmother had come over in utero from Italy and was born in 1899 in this country. On that was my mother's side. On my father's side, I'm not sure exactly when they came over, probably the early 1900s. My great-grandmother came from the Azores. Also, my father was, he was a bastard in more ways than one. And his biological father, all we really know about him is that he was a sailor who was, there's a Navy base, a submarine base, in New London, Connecticut, near where I grew up. So he was a sailor there who passed through and apparently had a good time. Also, my grandfather on my mother's side was a sailor during World War II. He was a submariner. And after the war, he was based in New London for a while, and that's how he met my grandmother. Which is probably more of my history than you probably need, but there you go.
Yeah, Azores are prime whaling territory.
Yeah. The Azores are prime whaling territory, from what I understand.
Were.
Oh, and I have been to Iceland, and for Thanksgiving dinner 2008, I had one of the more immoral...
No, I know where you're going with this one. Go ahead.
I've been to Iceland, and for Thanksgiving dinner 2008, I had one of the more immoral dinners one could ever have. The entree was a surf and turf, it was a lobster, that's not so bad, but also horse. But the appetizer was whale 2 ways, sashimi and tartare. So yeah, I'm a little bit immoral. So yeah, I've been around whales, I guess. Also, Mystic Seaport that has the aquarium there, so I used to go there a lot when I was a kid. And they I haven't been there in a long time, a lot of whales. I was brought into the project by Kevin Lennon.
Well, I picked Chris because I knew he had a real encyclopedic knowledge of film that deep down, despite his rough veneer, I knew that he truly had a love for film, and that, and I thought that it was a nice timbre to his voice, that we were having a little difficulty finding the right sort and character for the piece, and I just instinct took over my better judgment, and I asked Chris, "Hey Chris, I think you'd be good at this," and foolishly, he went for it.
Foolishly.
You guys have known each other for like 20 years or something?
No, something like that.
The project so far has borne it out. I was correct about what I had predicted for my friend Chris. Okay, friend might be going too far, but clearly talented. Frenemy might be a much better placing there, and I'm very pleased with the results.
Okay, give us a kiss.
That's staying in.
I mostly remember the image of the sailor, on the rotting whale carcass. I think that was probably supposed to be the strongest image in it. And I was thinking about it over time. Actually almost struck me as a parable of industrial production, and the horrors of industrial production. These sailors going out into the ocean, risking life and limb to produce these commodities, whale oil in this case, and winding up on a rotting corpse in the middle of the ocean without hope for rescue. Or maybe hope for rescue, we're not sure. It's kind of a parable of capitalism if you think about it. Did I feel like I was Nathaniel? No, I felt like I was telling Nathaniel's story. But of course, Nathaniel ends up on a rotting corpse in the middle of the ocean, and isn't that how we all end up in one way or another?
We all die alone? Is that what you're saying?
On a rotting corpse in the middle of the ocean.
I see.
Being surrounded by sharks.
That part I get.
So, hi, I'm Aron Rosenblum. I'm the writer of Scrimshaw.
Why did you want to write this?
The initial impetus, well, here's the thing. I have an intense fear of sharks. A lifelong fear of all sharks, all species, all sizes of sharks. And Kevin and I had gotten to this idea we were going to do this series of horror kind of narrated creepypasta kind of shorts. And I said to myself, well, the scariest thing I can imagine is being at sea and knowing that my death was imminent at the mouths of sharks. And so at some point I just hit on this image in my mind because I'd read or seen some kind of footage of one of these whales being slowly eaten by sharks. And I thought, what could be more terrifying for me personally than if the whales are quite big. And I said someone could clearly be standing on it and knowing that their death is imminent at the mouths of the surrounding predators. And I realized, well, in what context would this ever happen? And I said, well, it would have happened maybe back in when whaling was more of a full worldwide industry. So I came up with the idea to set it in, I'll go a little backstory. I lived for a brief time out on the east end of Long Island, near Sag Harbor, which was a former whaling community. And there's a lot of whaling history out there. There's a whalers church, there's a whaling museum. So I said, well, these whaling ships used to leave out of Sag Harbor, go to the Atlantic, and hunt these whales down. And I said, let me write a story that reflects that period of a young man who ends up in this horrible predicament. And from there it just kind of took off, and the more gruesome it got, the more giddy I got about it, because I'm a horrible sadist. And the more I made Nathaniel suffer, the more I found it hilarious. And so little by little I heap upon him more and more horror. And it started to become a challenge, like how many more horrible things could happen to him in the process of him being stuck marooned upon this whale's belly. Well, for instance, it seems like the main character's pretty much on the verge of, he's almost ready to decease. And he writes his farewells on this piece of Scrimshaw, which, needless to say, no one would ever see, but it's his own self, here's my last testament. And just that little added piece of horror is that the whale gets jostled, and he loses his hold on the Scrimshaw, and it slowly rolls
Into
like
the
a
drink.
marble into the ocean, never to be seen again. Which is, of course, if he survives, which we may
don't know.
or may
We
not
don't
know,
know.
this would be a horrible regret for him that he lost this thing, which was kind of his most meaningful thing that he'd come to realize was, had meant anything to him.
We end up on a rotting corpse in the middle of the ocean, and our fondest dreams just roll right into the
Exactly. And it could be a little thing. And I mean, the piece of Scrimshaw, it's just symbolic of something. I mean, like, there's a little something that a human could latch onto. No, it was the front of the Scrimshaw, which he had carved previous to the story, was a picture of a ship with a whale next to it, which he envisioned was his ship, and that he was gonna. His plan was, upon seeing her again, he wanted to give it to her as a gift, so she would think fondly upon him while he was out doing his whaling business for years on end. But that's and we already established from the beginning that he'd been doing this for about a decade or so already, and it's this was a hard life to live.
I'm reminded of a scene from Moby Dick where Ishmael is in an inn and he's trying to sign aboard a ship, and these other people have just come off a ship. They'd been on it for like 5 years, and they were about to sign up for another. He was like, these people have come ashore for a day or two after 5 years, and they're already ready to go out again.
Yeah. Well, that's what they. I guess that there was money involved, and I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, from our perspective, certainly. So to me, it seems like that should have been a very highly paid job, much like I think window washers who clean skyscrapers should be a highly paid job, because I would not want to do that either. I think jobs should be paid based on how little people want to do them, and whaling definitely is not. That would be a job that nobody would really want to do. Nathaniel's character had just got out of debt, and he had moved up in the chain of command. In the story, he's a kind of it's not a rank ship. They're not a naval vessel, so it's not. He's I guess what you call an able hand versus a green hand or a harpooner. He's actually worked his way up to having meals with the captain and things like that. So he's within reason. If it was a naval ship, he'd be like a lieutenant or something like that, in the top 5 of the ship. So he's much more now joined the organizational or administrative branch of the ship, rather than the hands-on.
But the question
cutting
is,
and chopping.
Does he go on the New Bedford sleigh ride? Do you know what that is?
No, but I feel like when you tell me, I'll go, oh yeah. No, I've heard it.
When they would put the small boats into the water to go after the whales,
right?
And they would harpoon the whale.
Right.
Well, the whale would often go,
he'd pull him
and the small boat would be like a sleigh ride.
Yeah. And the whaling boats, the little ones, they're tiny. They're tiny. I know they sat about 6 or 12 people or something, but they're really just kind of like a big rowboat. And these guys would just stand on the prow or balance, I don't know what, and chuck these harpoons at them. I mean, it's not really effectively differently than what Eskimos do now. Or I mean, it's really hands on. I mean, having to go right up to a whale and poke it is kind of,
Yeah, it reminds me of what I did in Iceland on Thanksgiving in 2008.
And what did you do in Iceland in 2008?
Harpooned a whale. That's you eat what you catch.
Well, yeah.
That's a joke.
Yeah,
that's a joke.
Yeah, we don't want to get PETA to be all. The PETA people will be very angry that we're engaging in any whaling hunting.
And I think it was only like a minke whale, so. It's okay.
Yeah. And, needless to say, I mean, it is such a... The reason I chose whaling, one of the things is that I thought it was a good palette to describe something that is fairly horrific. I personally would never want to kill a whale. But the thing is, the attitude that he's even presented is that this is absolutely normal. Because in the time period, it was perceived of as very, this is just something people did, and these were commodities that people wanted, and they might have turned a blind eye to the fact that a whale had to die to get them their corset pin or their, the oil for their lamps or their makeup or whatever they made out of it. But the bottom line is that people would go, well, I need that, and they'd buy it, which is what stimulated the industry. So it was a microcosm for capitalism.
Yeah, I was going to say that's why it's
absolutely
a parable for capitalism. The horrors of capitalism.
It is, and that's the thing. It's the thing is that this is even prior to the period when you had things like Teddy Roosevelt's child labor laws and things like that protected people from these kind of situations. I think that there was literally, I think, no controls on what happened on a whaling ship. Otherwise, aside from the fact that the captain was the boss, I'm sure there was, if you got out of line, there was corporal punishment. Oh yeah, I don't crazy
know,
stuff.
I don't know about like the merchant marine, but at that time period, certainly in the British Navy, probably in the U.S. Navy, they would have 11, 12-year-old kids, at sea.
Yeah.
They were officers usually, but probably doing the worst jobs there were on the boat.
And if you got ill, I can't imagine there was a really good health plan. You could have been taken by the Barbary pirates and made a slave in North Africa. I mean, it was, or you could, the British.
By 1845, we had taken care of the Barbary pirates.
True. I think I was more in the 1830s. They solved that by 1845. But yeah, still, I think even then the British had kind of begged off of impressing American sailors into being in the British Navy. But a few years earlier, that
was the War of 1812.
Yeah, that was fine to do as well. So actually, the thing is, in the story, it is set in 1845, which is really kind of the last year that whaling tapped out in the Atlantic. It kind of shifted to the Pacific after that for a few years, and eventually the whaling industry more or less died out because of the emergence of things like kerosene and gasoline, which Rockefeller explored in the the 1890s and early 1900s. So
leading to its own horrors.
Yeah, which is a totally different thing. But yeah, this is really the tail end of Atlantic whaling. It's nominally, I think at this point it's nominally exists, and I think at best you might have some occasional whaling off Japan or something. But even then, it's so frowned upon. And at least we got those guys out. You got your guys who are willing to get in a dinghy and go impede them.
You had some whaling in some of North America and
Alaska. You have some native whaling.
Yeah.
You have some in Iceland. You have some in Japan. You have some in.
I think nowadays
Norway.
I think it's Norway, Iceland, and Japan. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, are the only countries that still practice whaling.
I think that the Scrimshaw itself, the piece at the end of the story, or actually it recurs through the whole story, I think it's obviously it's supposed to be a symbolic, imbued piece of something that people put their hopes and dreams into. But what's interesting about it is that there's literally two sides, a front side and a facing side, which is obviously meant to be an ironic duality, because the front side has his ship with a whale successful. It's him. He pictures, I guess, Nathaniel. Next step, he'll be captain maybe, and he's on the ship, and that's his ship, and he's getting a whale and bringing home the bacon or bringing home the whale oil. And this is the positive side. The fact that he feels that he's forced to take this item that he's imbued all his dreams into and write this farewell address to his family, his brothers and his mother and father and his somewhat time paramour.
Paramour, ooh.
Yeah. The fact that he feels he's forced to do that, it's almost like he's viscerally taking his dream and he's seeing the the downside or the destruction of that dream is embodied in that piece of imbued little piece of bone. Which, and the piece itself, like, if you look at it, you go, well, it's a microcosm for what he does anyway. It's a piece of bone, which even addresses the morbid quality of his occupation to begin with. In many respects, Nathaniel's...
Because, paramour is usually a lover.
Well, they did kiss. They did kiss,
well, it goes a little bit more beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I think that in many respects, Nathaniel's life has the appearance that he's moving forward, but on another level, you could look at him that he's always kind of been a victim of the society and the time period and all that kind of stuff, which is a motif that Kevin and I have worked before when we've done Victorian set situations, because and obviously Merchant Ivory made an entire career out of addressing this. Are you gonna get in here? Because your voice.
Harvey Weinstein wasn't that bad, was he?
I think that Nathaniel's life in general, I think, is in some respects, it's kind of like many other literary figures from this time period, where you have, like, a perfect example would be like something like when you read, and it's a slightly later, we're looking more like early 20th century, but if you look at like stories like, say, Studs Lonigan or something like that, where you're looking at a character who kind of is doing everything that they're supposed to do or were told to do within the binds of their culture, society, and what they're expected to have a job and all this stuff, and at the same time they're kind of drifting through their life because that was what they were kind of expected to do. So Nathaniel is a perfect example. He's a whaler because his dad was a whaler. He's a whaler because he grew up in whaling territory in Sag Harbor, and this is what people did. And so on some level it's kind of, he's just repeating a pattern that he was kind of expected to for a person who was raised with the amount of money his family had. Perhaps if he was from a wealthier family and went to a better school, he would have been like, oh, I'm going and I'm breeding horses. But this is whatever, he would have done a different endeavor. But so he's not, Nathaniel is in no way an exceptional character. He's kind of an everyman for the time period, and I think that's part of the appeal to it, is that he's you can relate to him and say, I'm trying to understand where this guy's coming from, and I feel sympathy for his horrible plight. But on the other hand, you just look at him and say, yeah, but he's just this average guy. There's nothing particularly super impressive about him. He's not the smartest guy. He's not the most handsome guy. He's not the most accomplished guy. He's not the wealthiest guy. There's nothing really about him that's unusual for the time period, which I think has an appeal. I mean, it's very easy sometimes to write a hero who's really got a special knack for something, but his only skill is that he knows how to whale.
Although Melville, in describing the life aboard the boat, is he had Ishmael say that the whaling ship was his Harvard Yard. It was his university. I'm also reminded of Ahab. I said before, I'll quote Moby Dick at the drop of a hat. One of the things they say about Ahab is, he's been in the colleges and amongst the cannibals, fixed his fiery lance in greater foes than whales. He's Ahab, boy, Ahab. And Ahab of old was a crowned king.
The mention of death. Well, does he
die?
I'm not sure. I love the idea.
Yeah, the ambiguity.
That it's. I mean, I understand that some people, they love finality at the end of a story, and they love knowing, like, oh, he didn't die, or oh, he died, it was sad. I like the idea that it could go either way. The whale's starting to sink, but there's a boat heading in his direction. Who knows?
Once again, not to bring up Melville too often, but when he finished apparently his first draft of it and gave it to his wife to read, Ishmael is the narrator of Moby Dick, but at the end everyone dies.
Yeah.
And his wife was like,
Who's been narrating?
Who's been narrating?
Yeah, what's going on
and
here?
so he wrote, a little coda, I alone am escaped to tell the story.
There you go. Right.
And he's like, oh yeah, well I floated on a coffin. Okay.
Yeah.
So
There
does
you
he
go.
float on a coffin?
Well, no.
No.
I don't think we have any coffin. No. But we know the whale is sinking. The last few lines, the shark fins are just a few feet away.
And there may be a ship in the distance.
There may be a ship.
Ship's coming.
Yeah.
And
all you
maybe
have
who
to do
knows?
is punch a shark in the mouth and it'll
Right.
be fine.
Well, the repeating coda that occurs, I think, 2 or 3 times, in the piece is that he muses to himself. He says it was only a matter of time, and that's the last line as well, because it's only a matter of time before the ship gets to him, or only a matter of time before the whale sinks and the sharks eat him. So who knows?
Well,
and really, it's only a matter of time for all of us.
True.
I have to admit, the narrated works are harder in my mind than when you have actors reading dialogue, because obviously the narration goes all the way through and that's fine, but if you have all these disassociated images, it does require you to kind of figure out where they all go, and they can be moved around sometimes. So the editing is actually more complex, I think, in some respects, than when you're working with actors, because the actors are doing their line. You might have the actor doing the line 10 times, but it doesn't matter. It's one of those 10 takes you're going to use. It's going to go exactly where it's supposed to go, because that line has a response line to it. Seeing as this is based on a short story, obviously that narrative moves linearly forward, and that's fine. That's what ties the composition together. But it does make the editing actually kind of hard. We shot a lot of footage in Connecticut and out on Long Island, a little bit downtown, at South Street Seaport even. And we have some nice footage. I think some of it's actually very nice, and it will come out. I think it'll come out really well. But at the same time, it is kind of
abstract.
It's abstract footage in a sense. So it's not that different than our first narrated creepypasta, which was The Dark Wood, which originally the idea was we were going to do, I think, 3 of them, but then we got much more enthralled with the idea of doing more narrative, pieces with actors, which is what the general direction is. I know that people gravitate to, they like to see actors, prefer over a narrator, but I have to say that I think that it's actually harder than you would think, just trying to associate those images correctly with the voiceover at whatever point of the story that you're at. Saying that, there's obviously you get more and more skilled as an editor, but it still doesn't change the fact that you're dealing with a very different kind of piece than a piece that features actors.
What was the thing that you were trying to go for that would tie it together artistically or poetically, visually with the words, or was it? Are you trying to get an emotional tone off of what he's saying, from like an audio way, or are you really kind of like, let me key it in on the phrases and words that will create
that's the thing. Sometimes I kind of avoid using, like, having it be too obvious, because I felt kind of like, if he talks about a flag, I'd show a flag. I mean, so sometimes I got to the idea. Yeah, I said, like, there was this one moment, and it didn't actually edit out this way, but I had this idea in my head where I thought it'd be interesting to have we had this scene where we were moving forward in the pews of this church up to the altar. We also had this shot of the camera moving up along the railing of the whaling ship at the Mystic Seaport. And I thought it'd be interesting to keep cutting back and forth, but when I did that, I actually didn't like that, and I kind of ended up undoing it. But I thought it was an interesting thing, kind of paralleling, as if someone was walking up the middle aisle of that whaling church, and making it synonymous with walking up the stern of a or no, what's the is that
the ship?
The stern of the ship, along the planks. So
you're describing it. I have to say it sounds kind of beautiful. It's just a shame it didn't work out.
I just think the shots are probably better separate. The same actually goes for when adding score. Then you have to figure out, does the score go with this image, and is it impeding or assisting the voiceover? Is it in the right rhythm with what's being said and all that stuff? So it's a lot harder than you would think, I think. This is probably why a lot of times when people just do a narrated thing, a lot of things that are well-known creepypastas will be, they'll just literally hold on an image, or they'll slowly kind of just zoom in on an image, but imperceptibly slowly, and if you skip ahead 10 minutes at a time, you'll realize that the image is actually slowly changing. But their goal is they really just want you to listen to the story. Since we're trying to evolve as not just screenwriters but as filmmakers, we feel we have to learn how to make the films better. So when we're working with actors, that those films are better. I mean, I think it's just a matter of time before all these elements, come together better and better. And ironically, right as I think we get better and better, as we'll actually have other people do it. So, because the ultimate goal really is to make the movies and series that we've designed, and those are not meant to be small projects. They're meant to be large projects that would employ a large number of people. So we don't need to direct them or score them or find the actors ourselves or write every line ourselves. The goal would be to be more of running the project.
What I'm hoping that someone can see from what we've been talking about and what you've been talking about, just this project alone. I love film. I'm not. I think that's a word that I'm not using in any sense of hyperbole. I mean it when I say it. I love the extras. I love the special features. I love documentaries about making the shows that I like, and especially when it's skilled and talented people, it makes me want to know more. And I'm hoping that these little humble little projects will catch the eye of someone who also has a love and hopefully has the skill and talent and power to aid us in future projects, that they will see that we have that drive and that talent, that they will go from what we're seeing here in this modest venue, that they will go, wow, these guys have something. Then they can express it. They have a great desire to do so, and that they will look at other works and other things that we do. I would be interested in collaborating with people with similar visions, or even people with different visions. There are people that out there that if we had the opportunity to work with them, I would be so excited. It's hard to express.
Look, it's period appropriate. Brandy.
That was cute. I did like that.
If they drank it then, they drink it now. We just don't wail. Because why would we do that? That would be just weird.
An extra portion for brandy. Of brandy for all the.
He wants more.
Grog is rum, dude.
Yeah.
Well, who doesn't like rum? What kind of barbarian? So there's this thing called Scrimshaw, and it's a. I went with the camera.
Ah.
Yeah.
See, I think it should have been called floating on a whale carcass in the middle of the ocean.
I see your point.
That's just me.
Yeah.